In the early hours of a Tuesday morning, police sealed off the executive floor of Mirai Holdings, one of Seoul's largest companies. $40 million had disappeared. 3 days of forensic accountants, cybersecurity firms, and corporate investigators had found nothing. Then a homeless janitor pulled a crumpled invoice from a trash bin, walked into the boardroom, and quietly exposed the one person nobody had suspected, the company's own chief financial officer. But the real question isn't how she solved it. It's how a homeless woman from Atlanta ended up holding the answer that a building full of experts couldn't find. That story begins 2 weeks earlier. So stick around, because nothing in this story is what it first looks like. Clara Hayes had spent 14 years in Atlanta learning a skill nobody ever thought to put on a resume: how to disappear into a room while still seeing everything in it. She had run commercial cleaning crews for hospitals, regional banks, and office towers 30 floors into the Georgia sky. She knew which nurses were exhausted by the state of the supply closets, which bank floors were about to have layoffs by the personal photos quietly disappearing from desks days before anyone announced anything. People never told her these things. She simply noticed. Competent, dependable, invisible. For a long time, that had been enough. Then her mother got sick, and the bills started arriving faster than the paychecks could answer them. Then the company restructured, and the supervisor positions were the first to go. Then the apartment, which she had kept spotless for 6 years, was no longer hers to keep. It was a recruitment flyer that found her at her lowest point: a facilities management position in Seoul, South Korea, relocation assistance, competitive salary, a fresh start in a country where, the flyer promised, her experience would finally be valued the way it deserved to be. She used what little savings she had left. She landed in Incheon with 1 suitcase and a folder of documents for a company that, she would soon learn, had never existed at all. There is a particular kind of devastation in discovering you've been stranded in a country where you don't speak the language, with no family, no money, and an address that leads to an empty office space for rent. She slept at Seoul Station that first night and many nights after. She used donation bins outside churches for a change of clothes before job interviews she mostly didn't get. She washed her face in public restroom sinks at 4 a.m. before the cleaning staff arrived to chase her out. Every night, no matter how exhausted she was, she looked at one photo on her phone. Her younger sister, Daniela, laughing at something just out of frame, taken the Christmas before everything fell apart. Clara had raised Daniela herself after their parents passed, had skipped meals so her sister could eat, had worked double shifts so her sister could finish school. Daniela was the only family Clara had left in the world, and the thought of her sister finding out how far Clara had fallen was harder to carry than the cold. "I'm not going home like this," she would whisper to the photo every night, like a promise she intended to keep even when she had no evidence she could. 3 kilometers away, inside the gleaming headquarters of Mirai Holdings, a very different kind of pressure was building. Cho Dae-hyun had built Mirai from a single trading office into one of Korea's most respected holding companies, and now, at 45, he was preparing for the largest acquisition of his career, a deal that would double the size of the company and cement his legacy for a generation. Every document had to be flawless. The eyes of investors, regulators, and rival companies were all turned toward Mirai at once. It was, of course, exactly the kind of moment when small things go unnoticed, because everyone is too busy watching the big ones. The janitorial contractor servicing Mirai's headquarters lost several staff members within the same week. A flu outbreak, a resignation, a transfer no one had planned for. Emergency hiring began immediately, the kind done in a hurry, where rules bend slightly because someone simply needs a body to push a cart down a hallway. By Monday morning, Clara applied. She was rejected, then rejected again. Foreign. No permanent address. No Korean references. One manager actually told her, not unkindly, that she was overqualified for the position, which struck Clara as one of the stranger reasons she'd ever been turned down for a minimum wage cleaning job. It was Mrs. Park Sun-hee, the cleaning supervisor, who finally hired her. Not out of generosity, exactly, but out of necessity. Nobody wanted the night shift on the executive floors, and Clara needed the work badly enough not to complain about the hour. "You start tonight," Mrs. Park told her, handing over a uniform that didn't quite fit. 11 floors. You work fast, you work quiet, you don't touch anything that isn't trash. Understand? "I understand," Clara said. Head of security. Han Ji-ho understood things differently. He'd built his career on suspicion, and a foreign woman with no references hired in an emergency rush, given access to the executive floors during the company's most sensitive acquisition in history, struck him as a problem waiting to introduce itself. "Keep her away from the executive floors as much as possible," he told Mrs. Park, loud enough that Clara, mopping nearby, could hear every word. "I don't care how short-staffed we are." Clara didn't argue. She never argued. She simply nodded, picked up her cart, and got to work. It didn't take long for Clara to notice something about the executive floors of Mirai Holdings. People stopped seeing her the moment she put on the uniform. Confidential meetings continued in glass-walled offices while she vacuumed 3 feet away, voices never dropping. Sensitive documents sat unattended on desks for the entire length of her shift, sometimes still warm from the printer. Arguments happened in front of her. Quiet, furious, words meant for nobody's ears but the people exchanging them. She found sticky notes with phone numbers scribbled in the margins, coffee-stained drafts of memos that never made it to a final version, a torn page from someone's personal planner, abandoned in a recycling bin, full of names that meant nothing to her yet but would mean everything later. She began, almost without meaning to remember things, not out of nosiness, out of habit, the same habit that had once told her which bank floor was about to lose half its staff before anyone made an announcement. It was during her second week that she first really noticed Miles Foster. Everyone noticed Miles Foster eventually because he made certain of it in the most disarming way possible. 38 years old, Harvard MBA, Korean American. The kind of charisma that made boardrooms relax the moment he walked in. He showed up at company charity drives not just to donate, but to physically hand out food himself, sleeves rolled up, laughing with people 3 pay grades below him as if the distance didn't exist. He greeted every cleaner in the building by name, including Clara on only her 3rd day. "Clara, right?" he'd said, stopping beside her cart with a paper coffee cup in each hand, one of which he handed to her without being asked. "Mrs. Park told me we had someone new. Welcome to Mirai. I hope they're treating you well." It was such a small kindness. It cost him nothing. And yet, in a building where she had become used to being looked through rather than at, it landed harder than he probably ever knew. Clara liked him. Genuinely. That would matter later, more than she expected. Around the same time, a junior accountant named Ji-eun, 26 years old and barely 2 years into her position, began noticing something that troubled her in the company's vendor invoices. Small inconsistencies, numbers that didn't reconcile cleanly, amounts routed through unfamiliar third-party vendors before reaching their final destination. She raised it with her manager carefully, the way junior employees learn to raise concerns about people more senior than they are. "It's probably just rounding from the currency conversions," her manager said, barely glancing at the spreadsheet she'd printed. "Don't worry about it. Focus on your quarterly reports." Ji-eun went back to her desk that evening and sat there long after everyone else had gone home, staring at numbers that refused to feel like rounding errors to her. Clara, emptying the trash bin 2 desks away, noticed the particular stillness of someone sitting with a problem nobody would let them solve. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But she remembered. The small irregularities Clara had started noticing weren't dramatic. That was the trouble with them. The same vendor names kept appearing in places that had no obvious reason to be connected. A logistics company invoicing the maintenance department. The same logistics company appearing weeks later on an IT services contract, then on a legal services retainer, then on a shipment manifest from the cleaning supply chain itself. An invoice Clara had personally walked past in the recycling bin 3 different times before she ever thought to look twice. None of it was illegal on its face. Companies subcontracted to other companies constantly. But something about the pattern nagged at her the way an off-center picture frame nags at someone who has spent a career noticing exactly when a room isn't quite right. She started keeping a small notebook in her uniform pocket. Nothing dramatic, just names written in neat block letters during her breaks. Vendor names she'd seen cross too many desks that shouldn't have anything in common. Han Ji-ho caught her writing in it one evening near the executive elevator bank. "What are you writing?" he demanded, stepping closer than was comfortable. Clara closed the notebook calmly. "Names. Whose names?" "Companies," she said. "I like to remember the ones I see a lot. Helps me know where the recycling's coming from." It was, technically, true. It was also nowhere close to the whole truth. Han Ji-ho studied her for a long moment, clearly unsatisfied but unable to locate the specific rule she'd broken, and finally waved a dismissive hand. "Stick to your cart," he said, and walked away. Clara opened the notebook again once he was gone and kept writing. What started as small irregularities became, within days, a company-wide crisis. A routine internal audit, intended as preparation paperwork for the upcoming acquisition, instead surfaced a discrepancy too large to file away quietly. $40 million that should have existed somewhere in Mireille's accounts simply did not. Not missing in the dramatic sense of a single theft, but moved, layered, and redirected across so many transactions that nobody could draw a clean line from where it started to where it ended. Panic moved through the building like a change in air pressure. Theories multiplied by the hour. Hackers, someone insisted. Accounting failures, said another. Corporate espionage. Internal theft. By the end of the first day, half the executive floor suspected the other half, and nobody trusted anyone enough to ask the questions that actually mattered. Clara, moving through the chaos with her cart and her practiced invisibility, recognized something nobody else seemed to. Many of the transactions under suspicion involved companies whose names she already had written in her notebook. She found Ji-eun alone at her desk again, 3 nights into the audit, the younger woman's face drawn with the exhaustion of someone who has been right about something and ignored for it. "You noticed something before all this started," Clara said quietly, setting down a fresh cup of water beside Ji-eun's keyboard. "Didn't you?" Ji-eun looked up, startled that the janitor had spoken to her at all, let alone about this. "How did you—" "I empty the trash near your desk," Clara said simply. "I notice things. It's sort of the only skill I have left." "Nobody would listen to me," Ji-eun finally said. "I would," Clara said, "if you'll let me." That night, after the building had emptied of everyone except security and the cleaning crew, Clara and Ji-eun sat together in the break room, invoices and printouts spread between them. 2 women the company had trained itself not to listen to, finally listening to each other. The pattern, once they laid it side by side, became impossible to ignore. Han Ji-ho, to his credit, did not dismiss Clara a second time. Not after Ji-eun, with considerably more standing in the building, brought the same findings to him with her own name attached. He didn't trust Clara any more than he had before, but he trusted numbers. The investigation moved fast after that, and not in a straight line. First came the hacker theory. A board consultant had flagged a cluster of international wire transfers through shell accounts in Singapore and the Isle of Man. And for nearly 48 hours, cybersecurity firms chased a phantom breach, even pulling Ji-eun in to ask, pointedly, whether her flagged invoices had been a distraction of her own making. She answered every question without flinching. Later, Alone, at her desk, her hands shook for a full minute before she could make them stop. The transfers turned out to be a dead end, legitimate intra-company movements miscategorized during a software migration 18 months earlier, which meant the money had never left the building at all, which meant whoever moved it had done so from the inside, hiding in plain sight. Han Ji-ho went back to Ji-yoon's invoices, then to Clara's notebook, tracing every flagged payment through the approval chain, expecting to land on some careless mid-level manager. Instead, every payment, traced far enough back, required the same signature: Miles Foster. Nobody believed it at first, Han Ji-ho least of all. He pulled Miles's personal financial records, fully expecting to find nothing. What he found was, in its own way, more unsettling than evidence of guilt would have been. Miles's finances were spotless. No luxury purchases, no unexplained transfers, no offshore holdings, nothing that fit the profile of an executive quietly enriching himself. By every traditional measure, Miles Foster looked exactly like what everyone already believed him to be: the company's most generous, most trustworthy executive. It was Clara 2 days later, mopping the floor outside the records room, while Han Ji-ho and a forensic accountant argued in frustrated circles, who noticed the detail nobody else had thought to follow. "Excuse me," she said. "Those logistics companies, the little ones, from my notebook." "What about them?" Han Ji-ho said, more weary than dismissive now. "I noticed something while I was matching up names," Clara said, pulling her notebook from her pocket. "Each one of those vendor companies, after Mirai paid them, went on to buy something else: a warehouse, a shipping contract, a small freight company about to go under. Failing little businesses. Nobody would think twice about any single one." The forensic accountant frowned. "That's not unusual. Companies acquire smaller, struggling vendors all the time." "I know," Clara said, "but I started drawing it out." She turned the notebook around so they could see the rough diagram she'd sketched across 2 pages. Warehouses, shipping firms, import agencies, freight operators connected by lines she'd drawn between them. None of them ever showed up on the same invoice twice. None of them were big enough to flag, but every single one fits somewhere on a supply chain: a port, a warehouse, a delivery route. I kept thinking, what kind of person buys a dozen failing little companies and never tries to fix any of them? She tapped the diagram. Individually, they're worthless. Together, they're a complete logistics network, every link already in place. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion now. "The money wasn't stolen," Clara said softly. "It was invested, piece by piece, so small nobody would ever look at the whole picture at once." Han Ji-ho stared at the diagram for a long time before he finally looked up at her, something in his expression shifting for the first time since she'd arrived at Mirai Holdings. "Who approved every one of those vendor payments?" he said slowly, already knowing the answer before he finished asking it. Miles Foster had spent years quietly using Mirai's own money to build a second company, hidden in plain sight inside the first. The next 2 days moved differently than the days before them. Quieter, more careful, the hush of people preparing for something they know is about to break. Cho Dae-hyun reviewed the diagram Clara had drawn 3 separate times before he allowed himself to believe it. He'd known Miles for 9 years, had trusted him with acquisitions worth more than most people would see in 3 lifetimes, had genuinely, foolishly perhaps, considered the man a friend. The night before he authorized the police operation, Cho sat alone in his office with only the small desk lamp burning. An old photograph sat on the shelf behind him, the year he officially registered Mirai as a company. 20 years ago, 7 people. Him at the center, grinning in a way he couldn't quite manage anymore. Miles wasn't in that photo. Miles had come later when the people around Cho had shifted from founders and believers into professionals. And, he understood now, at least one very careful opportunist. He had spent his career trusting credentials, impressive resumes, confident posture, the look and sound of people who were supposed to succeed. What he had never learned was how to notice the things that didn't announce themselves. The junior accountant who raised a concern and was waved away. The janitor writing names in a notebook because 14 years of professional experience had taught her to notice when something in a room was off. He reached over and turned off the lamp, the question of how much else he might have missed sitting with him in the dark. The police, once shown the evidence Han Ji-ho's team had assembled, built on Ji-yoon's invoices and Clara's diagram of failing little companies that added up to an empire, moved carefully and quietly. An arrest of a chief financial officer at one of Korea's largest holding companies was handled the way Mirai handled everything that mattered, in a boardroom, behind closed doors, with as much dignity as the situation could still afford. Miles attended the final board meeting as if it were any other Tuesday. He wore the same calm, easy confidence he always had. If he felt fear, he never once let it reach his face. Cho sat across from him, the diagram and the audit report on the table between them, and asked the only question that actually mattered. Why? Miles considered the question with something that almost looked like respect for it. Because I built half this company, he said. No anger in his voice, no defensiveness, only a kind of weary certainty. Every acquisition that mattered, every deal that actually moved the needle, that was me. You signed the papers. I did the work. He paused, and something almost reflective crossed his face, the look of a man revisiting an old, well-worn argument with himself. 9 years of bonuses that depended on someone else's name being on the door. 9 years of board members thanking you for decisions I made in the room before you'd even arrived. At some point, you stop asking whether you deserve more. You start asking why you haven't already taken it. The room held its silence the way rooms do right before something true and uncomfortable gets said aloud. If you build the company, Miles said quietly, you deserve the company. Nobody answered him. There wasn't an answer that would have satisfied either of them. The police moved in without ceremony. Miles stood, straightened his jacket without being asked to, and allowed himself to be escorted toward the door with the same composure he'd walked in with. Before he left, he stopped. His eyes found Clara standing near the back wall where nobody had quite remembered to ask her to leave. He smiled at her. The same slow, almost amused smile from the very beginning, except now it carried something closer to acknowledgement than amusement. "Do you know why she beat me?" he asked the room, though he was still looking only at her. Nobody answered. "Because no one notices the janitor," Miles said. Even in defeat, he understood exactly where he had failed. The story of the $40 million conspiracy at Mirai Holdings became national news within days. What the headlines took longer to understand, and what mattered far more to the people who had actually lived through it, was the quieter story underneath the public one. Cho Dae-hyun asked to see Clara privately once the investigation had concluded and the cameras had largely moved on. His office, usually a room of careful composure, felt different that afternoon. Softer, the way rooms feel when the person in them has decided to stop performing for a moment. On his desk sat Clara's notebook, returned to her now that the case no longer needed it as evidence, its pages still filled with names in neat block letters and a rough diagram drawn across 2 pages. Cho turned it over once in his hands before sliding it back to her. "My legal team has 6 lawyers and 3 forensic accounting firms on retainer," he said. "None of them found what this did." He shook his head slightly. "I spent years trusting impressive resumes. I almost overlooked the most valuable employee in my company." He offered her an executive position on the spot. Title, salary, an office on the floor she'd once cleaned at midnight while nobody looked at her twice. Everyone who heard about the offer expected her to accept immediately. Clara thought about it for a long moment before she answered. "I don't want to stop being the person people overlook," she said. "That's not me feeling sorry for myself. It's the only reason I saw any of this in the first place. If I take an office and a title, I become someone people are careful around. I'd rather stay someone people forget is in the room." Cho studied her for a moment, and then he smiled, the first real smile anyone had seen on him in weeks. A week later, he announced a newly created position within the company, Director of Facilities and Operational Integrity. Officially, the role gave Clara oversight of cleaning operations, maintenance, and workplace standards across every Mirai property in the country. Unofficially, and far more importantly, it meant she reported directly to Cho himself, with access to every floor of the building and the standing to ask any question she wanted to ask. Han Ji-ho found her on the executive floor not long after, in the same hallway where he'd once told her to keep away. "I judged you before I knew you," he said, without preamble. "You noticed what my entire department missed." "You were doing your job," Clara said. "Suspicion is supposed to be your job." "Suspicion of the wrong people," he said. "I'm sorry for that." Ji-yoon, too, received the recognition. 2 years of being dismissed had earned her at last. Cho promoted her to senior financial analyst, and in the announcement told the entire company she had raised concerns about the invoices long before anyone listened. When Ji-yoon tried, in front of half the executive floor, to credit Clara with everything, Clara simply shook her head. "You noticed the numbers nobody wanted to look at," Clara told her. "I just noticed the trash nobody wanted to pick up. It took both of us." It was, in its own quiet way, the truest thing anyone said in the entire story. Clara moved into a small, modest apartment not far from Mirai's headquarters. Nothing extravagant but hers, with a door that locked and a window that let in the morning light. The first night she slept there, she sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, just feeling the quiet of a space that belonged to her. Then she called her sister. Daniela picked up on the second ring. The moment she saw Clara's face, the performance of calm she'd clearly been keeping up for months dropped slightly around the eyes. "You look different," Daniela said. "I got an apartment," Clara said. Daniela's jaw moved once, carefully. "An apartment. Are you okay? Are you actually okay?" "I'm okay," Clara said. And for the first time since she'd landed in Incheon with one suitcase and a folder for a company that didn't exist, it was true without any effort at all. She told Daniela everything then. The shelter, the public restroom sinks, the nights at Seoul Station watching her phone battery drop towards zero, and the job, the notebook, the boardroom at midnight, Miles Foster's slow smile, the diagram that had done more work than any forensic accountant in the building. Daniela listened without interrupting, which was not like her at all. "I told you I'd figure it out," Clara said finally. Daniela laughed, watery, helpless, relieved. "I know you did. You didn't call for weeks, and I didn't want to make it worse by asking." "I know," Clara said. "I never stopped believing you would," Daniela said. "I need you to know that." "Come visit," Clara said. "I want to show you the city." "Yeah," Daniela said, smiling now. Properly, the smile from the Christmas photo. "I'll come." Months later, Clara walked through the same executive hallways she had once cleaned in the dead of night. Unnoticed, just another uniform pushing a cart past people too important to look down. This time, people greeted her by name as she passed. She made it a point, whenever the company hired new cleaning staff, to meet them personally on their first day. She would walk them through the floors, and somewhere in that first conversation, she would tell them the same thing every time. "People think this job is about cleaning floors," she would say, then smile. "It's really about paying attention. On an afternoon in November, 4 months after the arrests, a new cleaner named Sue Bin, 22, her first week on the job, accidentally pushed her cart through the door of a meeting room where 3 senior executives were mid-presentation. The cart caught the door frame. Papers went sideways. Sue Bin froze, expecting to be shouted at. The executive nearest the door, a man who had once walked past Clara's cleaning cart 40 times without lifting his eyes from his phone, stood up, picked up one of the fallen papers, and handed it back to her. "No rush," he said. "Take your time." Sue Bin looked at him like she was waiting for the other half of the sentence. "We've learned," he said simply, "that the people who clean this building see more of it than we do. We're trying to get better at remembering that." He sat back down and continued the presentation, and nobody in the room thought it was worth commenting on because at Mirai Holdings, this was simply how things were done now. Sue Bin straightened her cart and continued down the hallway, holding her head slightly differently than she had when she walked in. Respect isn't earned by a title. It's revealed through character. And sometimes, through a crumpled piece of paper someone almost threw away without reading. If Clara's journey reminded you that your greatest strength may be something the world hasn't noticed yet, let us know where you're watching from down in the comments. And if you enjoy stories of quiet courage, hidden brilliance, and second chances, go ahead and subscribe to AfroK Tales and Chronicles. We'll see you in the next story.